Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to decode something absolutely universal, the deep biological urge for payback. We're talking about the psychology and neuroscience of revenge. We'll explore why retaliation feels so incredibly good at first, how it actually physically alters your brain, and most importantly, what science says is the real secret to finding peace. Let's get into it.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been wronged? I mean, truly wronged, and just felt this burning, intense desire to get even? Well, if you have, trust me, you are not alone. That intense feeling, it's not a character flaw. It's actually a completely natural, biologically wired instinct that literally every human being experiences. We are fundamentally built from the ground up to want to settle the score.
But here's where it gets complicated. The philosopher Francis Bacon once said, "A man that studieth revenge keeps his own wounds green, which otherwise would heal." And that perfectly captures the tension we're looking at today. It's this powerful biological tug of war between the temporary satisfaction of punishing someone who hurt us and the massive psychological damage that plotting revenge does to our own minds. So, here's how we're going to break it down. First, the sweetness of revenge. Then, your brain on vengeance. After that, we'll look at the trap of trauma loops, the illusion of closure, and finally, how you can actually escape the revenge cycle. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the sweetness of revenge and why retaliation feels so good. So, revenge isn't just some fleeting emotion. It's a deeply ingrained biological urge. And there was this absolutely fascinating PBS study that proved it. Researchers had subjects play a game while laying right inside an MRI scanner. When a computer opponent, quote-unquote, won and blasted the human subject with a super annoying, loud noise, the humans didn't just quietly play the next round. No way. When they won the next round, they deliberately blasted an even louder noise right back. Because, let's be real, nothing says take that like blowing out a digital opponent's eardrums, right? But here's the kicker. The brain scan showed they were actively seeking to punish their opponents. It literally illuminated the physical brain activity behind the phrase, "revenge is sweet." But, how far does this urge actually go? Would you literally throw away your own money just to get back at someone? Well, behavioral economics shows us that trust and revenge are basically two sides of the same irrational coin. In economic trust games, when players feel betrayed, they will gladly suffer a financial loss themselves just to make sure the other person hurts too. It's wild, but we are literally wired to sacrifice our own resources just to make sure a betrayer pays the price. Moving right along to Section 2, your brain on vengeance. Let's look at the actual neuroscience of payback.
To really understand what happens inside our heads when a grudge takes hold, we have to look at the work of effective neuroscientist Jock Panksepp. He discovered something amazing. He found that our brain actually takes the initial painful sting of injustice, which lives in our highly uncomfortable rage system, and it literally hands it off to a totally different network called the seeking system. And this seeking system, that's what gives us that cool, euphoric, pleasurable anticipation when we start plotting our payback. Basically, your brain converts your pain into a highly focused mission.
And according to Yale psychiatry lecturer James Kimmel Jr., this process builds into a literal physical addiction. It goes like this. First, you perceive a wrong. Boom, your anterior insula, that's your brain's pain network, fires up. Next, to get some relief from that pain, your brain creates a revenge fantasy. That fantasy then triggers a massive dopamine hit in your nucleus accumbens. And finally, you start craving more of that revenge. It's a vicious cycle where your brain actually starts needing that original pain just to justify its craving for the dopamine hit. Think of it like a gambler chasing a high at a slot machine. The caudate nucleus and the nucleus accumbens, these are your brain's core reward centers, they absolutely light up when you're just contemplating revenge. Your brain gets this short-lived dopamine rush from simply imagining the payback. But here's the catch. It leaves you feeling so much worse in the long run, while making you desperately want more of that initial fleeting high. Which brings us to Section 3, the trap of trauma loops and getting stuck in the past. So while your brain's seeking system is promising you relief through this awesome fantasy of payback, holding onto that anger is actually doing something terrible. It's making you deny that the past event is even over. Researchers actually call this denial rage. It's a state of retained anger caused by the complete non-acceptance of a past traumatic event. You end up with this totally futile desire to somehow rewrite history by punishing the offender today. And that directly creates what psychologists call a trauma loop. Instead of moving on, we actively subject ourselves to pain replay. We just constantly loop those painful memories right in our heads. And the tragic irony of this whole thing is that by doing this, we are massively increasing and prolonging our own suffering. We end up harming ourselves far more deeply and way more frequently than the original abuser ever did. We literally become our own tormentors. Now, you know what makes this trauma loop so incredibly deceptive? It's how we label it. We constantly mask these trauma loops and our deep desire for retribution under the very noble sounding label of justice. But we have to make a huge distinction here. There is justice as fairness, which is rooted in equity, change, and actual healing. And then there's justice as punishment, which is usually just revenge in a cheap disguise. Slapping the word justice on it simply gives us moral permission to pursue a dangerous addiction to revenge without having to feel guilty about it. Let's move to Section 4, the illusion of closure and the true cost of retaliation. So let's explore why finally acting on those carefully plotted revenge fantasies almost never brings the peace we expect. Take the ultimate revenge story, The Count of Monte Cristo. Now, watching Edmond Dantes act as an angel of Providence is super satisfying to read, but what was his actual cost? Well, he lost 14 years in prison. He lost his planned future at age 19. And then he spent decades and an immense fortune obsessively plotting payback. Dedicating your life to settling a score literally wastes your single most valuable resource, your time. Not to mention, it triggers massive cognitive dissonance because you usually have to compromise your own morals just to get even. And that brings us to the harsh, scientific reality of a psychological phenomenon called delusional relief. Here is the blunt truth. Punishing someone else does absolutely nothing to erase the original painful memory from your own mind. None of it. No matter how much you punish the offender, or even take it out on a substitute target, that traumatic memory, it stays entirely intact. The past simply cannot be changed by inflicting pain in the present.
All right, finally, Section 5, escaping the revenge cycle and how we actually move forward.
Fortunately for us, science actually gives us a really clear, actionable roadmap for breaking this addictive cycle. James Kimmel Jr. suggests running what he calls a miracle court right inside your head. It goes like this. Step 1, imagine a courtroom in your mind. Step 2, put the offender on trial. Step 3, deliver the absolute ultimate punishment in your fantasy. Go wild. But then, Step 4, and this is the absolute crucial part, once that tension is released, you have to stop and ask yourself, is this actually helping me? This technique allows you to safely release all that pent-up neurological tension before you make the conscious, healthy choice to let it go.
Which leads us straight into the incredible neuroscience of forgiveness. Now, forget what you've heard. Forgiveness is not about surrender. It's not about weakness, and it definitely doesn't mean saying the abuse was okay. Scientifically speaking, it is literal neurological liberation. When you actively choose to forgive, your anterior insula, that pain network we talked about, deactivates. Your reward network quietens down, your prefrontal cortex kicks in with actual logic, and that entire addictive craving circuitry completely shuts down. It is literally the biological antidote to the trauma loop.
Another super powerful psychological tool you can use is called memory editing, or scrambling the trauma. You can actually alter how your brain encodes the emotional weight of an event. Try this. Imagine that painful memory playing on a really distant cinema screen. Now, shrink the size of that image in your mind. Fade the colors out until it's just black and white. And logically recognize that the past version of you who was hurt simply doesn't exist anymore. You are safely right here in the present. And that brings us to a much, much healthier application of our biology. As Frank Sinatra famously said, the best revenge is massive success. This is so true neurologically. By consciously shifting your brain's powerful seeking energy away from the person who wronged you and redirecting it entirely toward your own personal goals, you start getting the dopamine hits of progress instead of punishment. You grow, you succeed, and eventually, you make the perpetrator completely and utterly irrelevant to your life. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. When you are wronged, because you will be, what will you do? Will you choose to stay locked in their story, feeding an endless neurological addiction that only hurts you? Or will you use that incredible energy to write your own massive success story? Just remember, true power isn't found in punishing others. It's in reclaiming your own future. Thanks for watching.